business out of the way, reading our recipes first. You always want to read the recipes first. So we're making homemade Cheez-Its and we're making spiced candied nuts. The Cheez-Its we're using, I'm using nice sharp cheddar. If you prefer the flavor of like a mild cheddar, that's fine too. You just want a hard cheese. You could even make these Monterey Jack or Swiss flavored Cheez-Its. You could kind of have fun with that. We're going with sharp cheddar today. It calls for whole wheat flour. It's a lot better for you. I tried a couple different stores and couldn't find it myself, and I ran out. So I'm just using regular flour, unbleached AP flour today for myself. But whole wheat flour is definitely preferred for this recipe. And then our basic spice mix, we've got salt, onion powder, garlic powder, and then water is really the binder that brings the butter and all of it together. Our nuts, it is a whopping 5 ingredients. You can always add different spices. This is a really fun recipe to play around with. If you like cinnamon or nutmeg, if you want to make these kind of like a holiday party mix, you can add that kind of yummy stuff to it. There's a lot of different things you can do. I have a medley of pecans or pecans, wherever you're from, cashews and almonds, because I really like those and I could find them in separate bags, and then I made a nice mix of them. If you wanted to get an already mixed version, that would be okay. You just want to look for some that are raw, not already roasted and salted, because we're going to be doing that part for ourselves. So you want to get like raw, unseasoned nuts, whatever kind they are. I think, oh, it doesn't say that on the recipe. It just says nuts. So it should have said that, unroasted or raw. That's my mistake. Should have caught that. So we're going to do the nuts after. We want to make the dough for our Cheez-It so that it can get into the fridge and chill. The longer it can chill, the better, just because then when you go to slice it or roll it, it'll be easier to work with and it won't break up into little crumbly pieces or anything. But so we want to make that quickly and get it into the fridge so that it has the longest amount of time possible before we take it out and start slicing it and baking it. It is an extremely simple recipe. We need to start with 8 ounces of cheese. Luckily, a lot of the cheese comes in 8-ounce little packages. This is exactly an 8-ounce brick of sharp cheddar. So I'm going to shred it. You could just cut it up into little pieces because you are going to end up chopping it up again anyway. But shredding it first gives it a head start, and it just makes it easier that when you pulse the machine, it'll bind with the flour even faster and better. So it just gives it a little head start. And so I'm going to use my regular box grater. I'm going to shred my cheddar on the wide shredding holes, and it won't take but a minute. This is nice and quick work with the cheddar cheese. You notice how I'm flipping it over? That's because it will get uneven as I shred. It starts to slant one way or the other, and then it gets a little too close to my hand and my fingers. And the last thing I want to do is shred my little fingers or my knuckles or my hands. So you want to be extremely careful when you're using a box grater and always know where your hand is. So now I'm holding my fingers very far apart away from the holes, and I'm guiding the cheese just with my thumb, just pushing it down a little bit. And when I get to the point where it's going to start shredding my thumb and I'm done, I can just throw this chunk into the mixer and it'll chop that up fine. I just don't want to hurt myself, so you always want to be careful. So there's all our cheese. It's going to go right into the mixer. We're going to be mixing the cheese, the butter, the spices. We're going to pulse that all up so it gets really nice and mixed. And then we're going to be adding our flour and then the water. So sort of one thing after another, and we give each time a little pulse. And I'll show you what that means. That's really specific on a lot of these food processors. It has 2 buttons, one that says on and one that says either off and it says pulse. I'll turn the camera. I'll turn the machine. You can see that it says on and then off pulse on this one. Pulse is the one that we want to use. If you left it running on the on button and it went the whole time, it would turn it all into a gluey paste, and we don't want that. We want a nice dough. So we want to pulse it, which means just pressing that button over and over again until we get it the consistency that we want it. First, we're going to make sure everything is inside. We want 4 tablespoons of cold butter. So I didn't take it out because it's, where did I put it? It's quite hot out. I thought I left it in the fridge. Okay. So 4 tablespoons of butter, which is half of a stick of butter. And I'm going to, again, give that a little bit of a head start by cutting that into little cubes, just because then the machine doesn't have to try to cut up a giant chunk of butter. That's too much mixing. We don't want to over mix the dough. We want to be very careful about turning this into a paste. The cheese can start to melt and get overworked, so we need to be really careful about that. That's why we pulse instead of mix. So I just cut that into little cubes. You can slice it. You can even just break it up with your fingers, which is perfectly fine, as long as you're giving it a little bit of a head start in the machine. So we've got our cheese, butter. We want to add salt, onion powder, and garlic powder. So the salt measurement we're doing here, half a teaspoon. And I'm using regular table salt for this. Kosher salt is much coarser, and it would break down in the food processor, but the measurement wouldn't quite be the same. It wouldn't be the same flavor of salt. So I'm going with the table salt here, half a teaspoon. And then it's very small measurements of the onion powder and garlic powder. It says 1/8 of a teaspoon. On most sets of baking measurement spoons, doesn't have that on there. So what 1/8 of a teaspoon is it's half of a 1/4 teaspoon. So you can just fill your 1/4 teaspoon, spoon up half of the way. If you don't have 1/8 of a teaspoon measurement, I happen to have one on this other adorable little set. They call it a dash, which is funny, but that's 1/8 of a teaspoon. So 1/8 of a teaspoon of onion powder and 1/8 of a teaspoon of garlic powder. These are very classic spices. They taste really familiar in a lot of different foods. So having these in the pantry is a pretty good idea. They go in a lot of different recipes. There's our onion powder. There's my garlic powder. We're going to pulse these together quickly. It won't take more than a couple pulses. We want to get the butter broken down and mixed in, and so you'll see what I'm going to do. I'm not going to hold this down. I'm not going to let it keep running. I'm going to pulse it. That's what that is, and you might have to do it a lot, but it is breaking it all up without over mixing it and turning it into glue. We get that pulse together pretty well, and we're going to add our flour, which is 1 cup. So hopefully you've got whole wheat flour. If not, AP flour is fine. We want 1 whole cup of flour. Make sure that it's a nice level cup. You don't want, I don't know if you can see this in the, here. You don't want like a big scooping cup. You need to measure that off. Make sure that it's nice and level, okay? So this is a 1/2 cup measuring cup that I'm using, so I'm going to have to do this twice to make 1 full cup. Good math lesson. Nice and level. Okay, so there's my 1 full cup of flour. We are going to pulse this again until it looks like breadcrumbs. If you don't know what breadcrumbs look like, just imagine what it would look like if you put a piece of bread in here and pulsed it all up. It should look kind of like wet sand at the beach. Okay, and then we're going to be adding water. The recipe says 2 to 3 tablespoons of water. That's because it sort of depends on the cheese that you used and how much moisture there was in it. So we're going to start with 2 tablespoons, and then if yours doesn't come together like a dough, you might need to add a little bit more water up to 3 tablespoons. but we're going to start with the lower amount and hope that that's enough. I think that you can see here in this camera the consistency, very breadcrumby, kind of like the difference between fully dry sand and fully soaked wet sand, like that kind of loose, wet sand at the beach that you can run on. There's that. Nice coarse breadcrumbs. We're going to add water. You want to use cold water. So if you have water that comes out of the door of your refrigerator, that's perfect. I have a Brita filter in here, so I'm just going to fill up this little measuring cup and use that. As long as it's very cold water. We'll start with, like I said, 2 tablespoons of it, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, and again, we don't want to blend it too much. We want to pulse it. It might take a minute for it to start bringing itself together, so you just keep doing this until it looks more like a dough. And if you just keep doing it and it definitely doesn't look like it's going to come together enough, then you add that 2nd or 3rd tablespoon of water. I think that mine needs a little bit more, although it's going to depend if I can grab it and squeeze it together. Will it hold? Yeah, it will. See, when I just barely grab it together between my hand and squeeze it in my fist, it makes a solid dough. So that's going to hold up together really well in the fridge, and then after we slice it, it's going to be nice and cheesy. I think that I might not actually add any more water. You don't want them to be chewy. You want them to be able to crisp up very well. So yeah, I think that I'm okay. So I'm just going to leave it with the basic 2 tablespoons of water. It definitely depends on your cheese and how wet that might have been. I'm going to set this aside just so there's space. I'm going to put this out onto my work surface here and then get rid of the machine. Be very careful if you're using this food processor. These blades in here are extremely sharp, so have help getting that out and setting it aside so it can be clean. And then using your hand, kind of bring the dough together, and then you're going to put it out onto your work surface. Yeah, that's going to be nice. Okay, get rid of this. Just going to make sure that it all comes together and stays together in this sort of, we're going to divide this into 3. You can do more than 3, but at least 3 sections, just so that it actually will cool down and set up faster if it's in smaller sections. So, and we're going to roll these into logs. They want to be the circumference of the log needs to be the width that you want your Cheez-It crackers to be. If you want them to be teeny, teeny, tiny, then you can roll your log into a very skinny little worm. Or if you like your crackers to be kind of bigger, you can roll it into a bigger log. They'll just take a little bit longer to bake. I'm going to go for kind of a quarter, like the size of a quarter. Maybe a big fat hot dog or a sausage, I guess. Just a log. You want to make sure that it's nice and even. Not really skinny on one side and really fat on the other. You want to make sure that it's nice and straight too. What we're going to do is after they're set up and firm in the fridge, we're going to just slice them to make our little crackers. So you want it to be the same size all the way across so that you get the same size crackers when you slice it. And to roll it into this nice log, you want to start from the middle, not from the outsides. So start from the middle with your hands and very gently roll your hands out to the outside, gently pushing on the dough itself. And so it's nice and smooth. Let the work surface do a lot of that work for you in terms of rolling it and smoothing it out. You don't need to put much pressure on it at all. Very gently working from the middle. I've kind of started it. Again, I'm giving myself a head start with everything in this recipe. Try to get it to the general shape that you're eventually going for. Make sure it's not cracking or drying out. And then starting in that middle, push down on your hands and then push them out towards the outside. Very gently rolling it back and forth. And sliding your hands out towards the out like you're kind of rubbing it like that. Very, very gently. You're not pushing hard at all. Kind of letting like the gravity of your hands do the work against the surface of the table or cutting board until you get to the width that you want it to be. There's a nice size. I think that my right hand is a little bit more eager. My one side is, you can always push one side back in and even one side out if it's not quite right. Okay, once we've got all of these.
Oh, sorry. You have a message that says we're a little bit behind. How should it look if we put in enough water? Just a reminder again.
Yeah, that's what we said.
Okay, so if you put in enough water, it should look like really, really wet breadcrumbs. And it should look like if you it's starting to clump into kind of bigger chunks. And you can feel it, and if you feel it and you grab it in your fist and put it in a ball and it holds itself together in a ball, then it's ready. I hope that answered that.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, so once you have it ready and you are all rolled out, we're going to wrap these very tightly in plastic wrap and get them into the fridge or freezer to get them chilled down nicely so that we can start slicing them. You want to make sure that these are pretty firm. You can kind of pick them up and feel them. If any area feels weaker than the others, then just kind of try to firm it up and make sure that it's all consistently dense, the same denseness, thickness all the way through. All right, these are done. I'm going to wrap those in my good plastic. Let's see. So when you're doing this, you want to lay out the plastic first. This is how you get a really, really, really airtight seal when you're wrapping things in plastic. Lay the plastic down first and wrap it very tightly over, making sure that you're sealing around the edges. And then when you do this, you can do a bunch in the same kind of sheet and just make sure there's a little space in between. Keep rolling it. So that they're very, 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 very airtight and nice and firmly wrapped. Do these two in this other sheet. This is called cater wrapping, actually. This is how you do it for catering so that nothing spills ever. Under over wrap. Okay, make sure that they're both really well sealed. I'm going to put mine in the freezer because we're kind of moving a little faster than normal today, and I want to get them nice and set up before we move on. Okay, those are going to chill. As long as they're in your fridge for, 10-15 minutes, they should get firm enough for us to be able to work with them. You can let them sit in the fridge for 2 hours, and then they'll be really great. So if it's something like you have the dough and then you kind of do other things and come back to it later, that's a great way to do this. We are going to move into our spiced nuts so that we can get that all mixed and get that in the oven. While that's all working, our other dough will chill, and it's going to be rock and roll bake-a-thon after this. So I've got one bowl that I'm going to be mixing my ingredients in, and then we're going to be adding the nuts to that. I have a sheet pan here that I have lined with a silicone baking mat. You can use parchment paper, but you definitely have to line it with something. Foil, Oil's not really going to work. Just it doesn't have the same release. You can use foil and then a little bit of a teeny tiny bit of like pan spray and kind of coat that with a paper towel or something. It's the release that you're looking for. It's not just about keeping your pan clean this time. Usually that's why I use things like that, just about cleaning, but we're making a caramel, like we're making a caramel on the sheet pan itself, so you definitely need to be able to have something that's gonna release the nuts when they are done. So we're going to mix our powdered sugar, confectioner sugar, same thing, and other spices and water in this bowl, and then we're going to add the nuts to that. I seem to have, here we go. We need a half a cup of powdered sugar. Kosher salt this time. We are using salty crystals because we want that really kind of nice sea salt crunchy flavor. And I'm using cayenne. Cayenne is spicy. If you don't want spicy, then maybe use a paprika. That's still got like a nice pepper flavor, but it's not spicy really. You can also, like I said, add other spices to this. I have some smoked paprika here and a teeny tiny, I'm gonna add maybe a pinch of cinnamon. I think that makes a really nice blend. You could add a little teeny bit of cumin would kind of complement the spices really well. You could split the powdered sugar in half and do a little bit of brown sugar too. There's a lot of different things you can add to a basic spice nut. Especially the different spices. It just depends on how spicy you like things. These come out tasting sweet, a little spicy, and salty. It's like the perfect mix. Excuse me. Okay. I'm gonna just be using the powdered sugar today. We need a half a cup of that, which I put here with water in it. Okay. Quarter cup measurer comes in handy. I'll use 2 of these. I'm going to level this off very carefully. Powdered sugar. Sorry about that. Powdered sugar tends to be kind of clumpy. You want to really make sure that you're measuring that nice and level. Okay, we're going to put this right into our large empty bowl. Oh, you know what? Sorry. I have twice the amount of nuts measured out here, so I'm actually making 2 times this recipe because then these nuts won't go bad, then they'll be nice and roasted and already finished. So you don't have to do 2 times this recipe. I hope this doesn't confuse anybody while you're following me along. I won't really announce this. Just I'm going to just announce the measurements on the paper on the recipe so you guys can just follow the one-time version. 3/4 teaspoon salt that goes into this bowl as well. You're mixing the sugar, salt, spices, and water. Like I said, everything except the nuts. So 3/4 of a teaspoon. You're just going to use your 1/4 teaspoon measurer 3 times. Most of these spoons don't come with a 3/4 measurement either, so you want to do the 1/4 teaspoon measurement 3 times of kosher salt. If you don't have kosher salt, sea salt is fine. If you don't have that, table salt is also fine. So just 3/4 teaspoon for the regular recipe. And then it's a half a teaspoon of the cayenne pepper, but again, that's totally up to you. Cayenne can be kind of spicy, although it is blended out with a lot of it's a large amount of nuts for only a half a teaspoon of cayenne. But if you're making this for more, like if the kids are making this for themselves, then just sort of think about how spicy you like stuff. So I am just going to do a half a teaspoon of cayenne. And I'm going to add a couple more blends of paprika and cinnamon, just because I can. So if you're adding other spices, keep it very, very low, between 1/8 of a teaspoon or a 1/4 teaspoon, because otherwise, like cinnamon itself is an extremely overpowering flavor. but so I want it to mix with these flavors, not take over the other flavors. So I'm just gonna do a little less than a quarter teaspoon of cinnamon, and then I have smoked paprika, which gives it a little nice smoky flavor at the end. I'm going to add just again a little less than a quarter teaspoon of that. I don't want them to be just taste like smoked nuts. I want them to just have that quality mixed into all the other flavors. So if you have other spices that you really, really love and you think it would be fun to try, go ahead and try it. I think that a lot of things like mix with cinnamon really well. I think a lot of things, cumin goes with chili really well, so that would be nice with these also. So you can do a lot of variations with this. The basic is just that cayenne, and then the salt and the sugar. And we're gonna do 4 teaspoons of water. I'm gonna use that same cold water that I had and just measure out 4 teaspoons. Make sure that it's nice and full, level teaspoon. You need all of this liquid. It's going to make this sugar into a kind of a paste. So for the 1 times recipe, it's just 4. You're going to use a whisk or a fork to mix this up really well. Like I said, it just kind of makes like a goopy, glazy, not very pretty, but it's a thick liquid. It's got all the colors of the different spices that I put in. Yours will be a little bit more just red if you just use cayenne or just paprika. Okay, now we've got this really well blended, then we're gonna add in the nuts. The reason you wanted to mix this first, if you put it on top of the nuts, like added just those ingredients and then tried to mix it, this glaze that we've just made wouldn't be really well combined or consistent, and the nuts wouldn't get very well coated. So you want to make sure that they all get coated really, really evenly at this point. I'm going to use, where is it? I have a spatula here to make sure that you get all the way to the bottom where all that good glazy liquid is, and you're kind of scooping and folding it over. You see how I'm going to the bottom and then bringing it up to the top? You're folding the nuts into that liquid. And make sure that they get really, really well coated. So don't get lazy. Don't think it's done when it's not done. Make sure you go for a couple of minutes. You want to make sure they every single one gets really, really well coated and goopy. Then we're going to pour these out onto the baking sheet that has either a silicone mat on it or a piece of parchment paper. You want to make sure that they're in as flat of a layer as possible. If you're doing too many of the nuts and you've got a big stack of them on the sheet tray, they're not going to cook, they're not going to get crispy. That caramel is going to just stay sticky. And we want these to get kind of candied. We want that caramel to crisp up in the end and dry out. So you need to make sure that they have plenty of space. Nice single layer. So I'm going to pour these out and show you. If there is any of the glaze left in the bowl, you want to scrape that out too. Drizzle it all over the nuts on the sheet tray. Make sure you get all of that sugar water that you mix together. All those really yummy flavors from the spices, or especially if it is just salt and cayenne, it's a classic spice mix. It's going to be really delicious. So you want to make sure you get all that flavor out. Here, let me see. I can turn this camera. So you want to make sure that it's very, very spread out. So make sure it's all the way to the corners and the edges, all the way. And if you have any really big clumps, if things are clumping, or if you have any empty space, just make sure that it's nice and spread out and you're trying to give as much individual room as possible. Because later on, that'll mean you'll have more individual pieces of nut instead of clumps of candied nuts. Okay, so once you've got it nice and smooth in a single layer, that's going to go into a 350-degree oven and bake for just about 10 minutes, maybe 12. Really excited about that. Okay. Once you've got yours in the oven, should be in the middle rack. Most things that you bake, you want to put right in the middle of the oven, not too close to the bottom, not too close to the top. So make sure you're baking it on the rack right in the middle. And set your timer for about, let's go with 6 minutes because we want to take a look at them and give them a little spin if we need to. That's always a good idea halfway through when you're baking things. Unless the recipe says very specifically, do not open the oven during baking. And some things do say that, but not this, so it's okay. So next thing we want to do is check our cheese dough. It hasn't been in there that long because those nuts are a really super fast snack, which is another reason why it's really great. Just going to straighten up our area a little bit here. We're going to get that dough out and start cutting it and laying it out onto another sheet pan, which also should be lined with parchment or a silicone baking mat. I'm going to get that out. Excuse the noise. For this, I'm going to use parchment because I only own one silicone baking mat. Really, it's fine either way, one or the other. One thing I'm going to say now, because if you have those nuts going in the oven, when the nuts are done and they come out, you're going to need to take the baking mat or the parchment paper off of the pan right away. So the parents are going to have to help with that because it's going to be hot. It needs to come off the pan so the nuts don't continue cooking. Otherwise, they'll overcook and like the caramel might burn on that hot pan, the hot pan that has been in the oven the whole time. So clear a space in your kitchen now. I've got this section of my counter cleared off and ready so that when the nuts come out, I don't have to then fumble around to try to get an area cleared off because you're going to need to take it off of the pan using, I'll show you when I do it, you're going to use your oven mitt or towel to hold the pan and then gently slide the paper off the other side. But make sure you have a space on your counter or somewhere in your work area or even like the dining room table in the other room, just as long as you can put something hot on it. And then, yeah, having that ready now will help you. I've found myself in that position a lot of times trying to get something out of the oven. And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait. I have to put it back in the oven until I find somewhere to put it. Okay, so I'm getting this sheet pan ready with parchment paper for our Cheez-Its, which I'm going to get out and start cutting. Yeah, because they take about 15 minutes in the oven, and I want to get at least one batch done for you so you can see. Parchment comes in a strange width, so you always have to fold it. Okay. I'm going to start with these smaller 2 logs, and I'm using my very sharp chef knife here. So if that's something that the parents also might want to help with, or if you have a really good safe knife, you just don't want to push down into it. We're going to gently cut into it. So maybe a serrated knife would work well for you too. I'm going to use my nice sharp knife here. I think it's going to slide through it okay. I'm going to cut off the end. I'm not throwing that away. I want that. It's just going to be a funny shape. I'm going to lay these out about 2 inches apart from each other on your parchment or baking mat. And I'm cutting them about, it's pretty thin, maybe 1/8 of an inch thick, but it doesn't really have to be perfect. You're just kind of cutting them into thin coins. If it's between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch, that's fine. They're just going to make nice cheese crackers. They don't have to be perfect. If you wanted to, you could chill your dough, and then you could roll it out into a sheet, like you would with pie dough or something, and then you can cut it into squares that way. I don't really care if they're squares or circles, so I just cut it from the log because it saves me that extra step of having to roll it out and cut it into squares. So I'm just cutting these into kind of odd-shaped circles, however they get cut off the log. Makes it look a little bit more homemade and rustic, plus they're just a perfect bite size. That it doesn't matter what shape they come in. So I'm sliding my sharp knife into it and then kind of chopping downward after I've slid halfway through, which is why it's kind of squishing into this non-circular shape. If you have a serrated knife, you can kind of gently saw through it if you do care about keeping them a perfect circle. You can also just chill them a lot longer. Like if they're super duper solid, then they'll keep their shape as you cut them with any kind of a knife. But I want to get these in the oven. So giving them about an inch to 2 inches apart on the sheet pan. And once you've got your sheet pan full, you put that in the oven, and it bakes at the same temperature as the nuts at 350 degrees. So I actually will put these in at the same time so that we can get them going. Melanie, I know these are not necessarily the healthiest recipes, but in terms of comparing homemade snacks or store-bought snacks,
Right.
is there anything that's good to know about this?
Yeah, I mean, the Cheez-Its, I believe, if I'm correct, 'cause I've looked at them several times, have about 20 ingredients in them. So typically, not all the time, of course, but typically the more ingredients a product has, especially things you cannot pronounce, the unhealthier, or not as healthy it is. So with Julia's recipe, you can see that we know what everything is that's going into it. And there's nearly not as many, ingredients in it. So definitely a lot less salts for sure, which is great. We're baking them, no oil or anything much on there. So, much better option than buying the store-bought. I know that the Cheez-Its also have a motto, I think, in it, which is a coloring to make it brighter.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of preservatives and things like that, and they're added sugar. So with Julia's recipe, okay, yeah, it has butter in it and stuff like that, but it's still much better than buying the pre-store-bought. Cool. But yes, agreed with that. And nuts, you can enjoy them in moderation. They are pretty calorically dense. That doesn't mean that they're bad for you at all. Nuts are an actual superfood, amazing for you. Lots of fiber, lots of antioxidants, plant-based protein, amazing for you. Once in a while, if you want to add some sugar, again, what Julia's doing and make them fun here or there, it's completely fine. I mean, everything in moderation. That's what we preach in this class series. If this is your first time with us or your 5th time with us, whatever it may be, we preach moderation. So it's all about portion size, whether it has sugar or not with nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I'd rather get my sugar in that form, knowing that I'm also having like a really super awesome snack with it rather than like an Oreo, which.
Right. Exactly. That has no other nutrition
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the Cheez-Its are, I know I've looked at that label in like our food, in our label reading class, and I think it has like 18 to 20 ingredients in it. So yours is definitely a lot less ingredients, which is awesome.
Yeah, and hopefully you guys found that whole wheat flour. That makes a big difference too, just getting more whole wheat into your body.
Exactly.
Someone
asked how long till time to take them out of the freezer. Oh, meaning how long should it be left in the freezer?
I mean, technically you could leave them until they're frozen and then pull them out and slice them at that point. But you don't want to just freeze the dough forever. There's too much, cheese does freeze, but not really in this form too well. So if you were to make a bunch of this dough and then not have time to bake it right away that day, wrap it up and keep it in your fridge, and you could bake it the next day, something like that. But since they're crackers, you want the baking of the crackers, they'll last in an airtight container on your counter for like a month if they last that long in your house, you know.
Yeah.
My timer just went off. That was for 6 minutes on these spiced nuts. I want to give them a look, see how they're doing. Starting to get a little toasty. I can see the sugar caramelizing. I'm going to spin it around because my oven is a little uneven. Definitely hotter towards the front and on the right side. So I want to make sure everything gets nice and evenly cooked. I've got my Cheez-Its in there as well. They're on a slightly lower rack. So partway through cooking, I'm going to, after the nuts come out, I'm going to raise them up to the middle rack just so that they don't get, if they cooked the entire time on the bottom rack, they would get browner on the bottom than they would be on the top. We don't want that. We want them to be a nice, even, golden bake all the way through. So if you roll yours out into like a square and then cut them into little square crackers, you want to poke that little hole in it. Like that's why the commercial Cheez-Its actually have that. It helps release a little bit of the steam while it bakes. Because we cut these, they have kind of natural bit of like cracking in them, so that's going to happen without having to poke a hole. But you can use a little tiny toothpick and poke a hole right in the center, and then they look, you know, traditional, kind of like they're meant to. But it does. The reason they do it is for the baking. It's to help release the steam. The cheese has a lot of water and steam that will want to release itself while baking, and so.
And another big question that I have for you, you know, for the nutrition side is how long do these crackers last? Like after, you know, you make them, can you eat them for?
I mean, they'll go stale. They'll go stale after like it depends on the container. If it's a super airtight container, maybe up to 4 weeks, but they'll start to go stale in a couple of weeks. They're not really, they won't last, you know, they don't.
And that's important to know because again, a traditional box of Cheez-Its you can have for like 2 years in your cabinet. So it's important to note that difference, you know, from a nutrition standpoint. That clearly, if it's lasting more than a month, you know, it's probably has something in it to prevent it from spoiling.
Yes, yeah. And these are cheese products. So normally we would keep cheese in the fridge, but because they've been baked and cooked and dried out, they can stay out and not mold, but they'll get stale and then they eventually will go bad soon after that. So you want to eat them up and use them. They're a homemade snack, definitely. The nuts will also start to get a little bit chewy because if they lose their crisp, they start to absorb moisture from the area, and so you can actually just put them back in the oven for a few minutes and get them crispy again and then let them cool off and they're good to go. You can't do that forever. They will just eventually, you don't want to eat them after maybe, about a month. They'll last about 4 weeks on your counter. So we want to keep an eye on the candied nuts because I didn't reset the timer. I think it's supposed to be just another 5 minutes or so. What you're looking for, I think I can show you in certain places here. The caramel actually, it's really, because that's kind of what it is, making the powdered sugar with the water, is going to start to brown a little bit. There's places you can see here, it's getting that nice kind of golden honey brown on the mat. And that's what we're looking for, that kind of color that you can, hope you can see that. It's definitely like a nice caramel flavored caramel. That's what we're looking for, nice and kind of a rich brown caramel color. And the fact that the nuts themselves are not really, really, really soft and chewy, I'm going to leave those in for just another minute, but I'm going to switch the shells so that my Cheez-Its can now be on the middle. And the nuts will just get a minute or two on the bottom rack. Get nice and golden. And then those are going to come out, and I'm going to slide that mat of nuts right onto the counter so that they don't keep cooking. The counter is going to help start cooling them down right away. And they might need to set up for about 10 to 20 minutes. It's when they're completely cooled down that you'll know if the Candied worked. If they are nice and crunchy, then you baked them long enough. If they are still a little bit soggy or kind of chewy, then they just didn't bake long enough. And all you have to do is put them right back on the baking sheet, throw them right back into the oven, let them bake another 5 to 10 minutes, and then let them cool down again and test how candy crunched they are. And the only reason that you want to do that is because that's how they can stay on your counter for an extended period of time. Once you've gotten them candied, they are temperature kind of controlled. Unless you live in an extremely hot place, then they'll stay separate. You know, the candy isn't going to get melty and gummy and then everything's going to form one like mass. If you underbake them and they're still chewy and kind of soft, then they will do that on your countertop. They'll just melt together, and then you have to break them apart, or most people just throw them away at that point. And we don't want that to happen. That's a waste. So make sure that they are nice and dried out and crunchy before you put them into a container. And if you need to rebake them again, just throw them back in until they're done. Yeah, that's kind of the thing. They're very forgiving. Even if you think oh, I've already cooled them down, they're ruined, just put them back in the oven and try again. So I think that being on the bottom, they're going to cook pretty quickly. Yes, maybe you can see this. The caramel is bubbling now in the middle. Very brown, sweet, bubbly caramel. I don't know if you can see that. So we're done. That's what you're looking for, a good caramel that has formed and the nuts are nice and candied. Very carefully. This is definitely a parent job. You're going to use a towel maybe and an oven mitt, something. Be really, really careful. I'm going to use a spatula to move some of these nuts away from the edge of the mat where I intend to grab it and pull it off of the tray, because I don't want those hot, sugary, burning nuts to accidentally touch my thumb. I'm going to hold the tray on the other side really carefully, and then I'm going to grab that silicone mat and just pull it off the tray onto this counter. And I say that like it's easy, but it's not, so just be really, really careful. Just grab the very, very edge. The paper, especially if you use paper, should not be so hot to touch. You should be able to grab that. The silicone can get a little hotter, but not so much that you'll burn yourself, so don't worry about that. Just grab the very edge and kind of slide it off and then pull the tray out from under, and you're left with the situation on your counter where it's going to cool very nicely for the next 15-20 minutes, and then you're going to check how candied they are and how crunchy they are. And if they're not fully crunched, you're just going to pop them back in the oven. I'm going to leave this, let that tray cool for a minute, and I'm going to check my Cheez-Its. Because these we also might want to spin around the tray. What you're looking for on this is that they're nice and dry, and when you touch them, they don't feel soft. They feel like a crunchy cracker, like they've been baked all the way through. The cheese, right now I just touched them and it kind of still bounced back on me. I'm gonna wait until that's like crisp, and then they're done. So I spun the tray 180 degrees so that the back is now on the front and everything's gonna get a nice even cook. You want to do that with baking things, especially, guys. Cupcakes and cookies and things like that. You really want to make sure it gets even love all the way around. So spinning halfway through your cooking process is a very helpful trick, because almost no oven in the world is perfectly balanced. So I haven't found it in 16 years of cooking in lots of other people's kitchens. So this is my pro tip: spin your food. So that's going to just take another couple of minutes. We're going to be done just in time here for you to see this. Of course, check the Instagram page for any of the final photo shots. And I would love to see photos of what you guys are making. If you don't show us here, then show us on the Instagram page at UCLA Teaching Kitchen. And then always you can find helpful information on Melody's site too. Elevate Your Plate. She has an amazing resource center, so follow her for sure. And then
both of our stuff here. And some people didn't get the recipes, so I already sent them their way.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I sent it pretty early on. I'm trying to get ahead of the game so that you have time to do shopping. I'm noticing people do want to participate, so I'm sending them out a little in advance. So if you signed up after that, I'm really, really sorry. You can always reach out to me if you don't get it. And if I don't have the right email for you, maybe that happened. I just copy the registration form. So Next week recipe, I'm going to be emailing tomorrow. So if you don't see it end up coming to you by the end of the day tomorrow, then reach out to me and I'll make sure that you're on the proper email list, okay? Next week, I'm really excited. Let me look here. I have it written down.
Yeah, just make sure you're registered through UCLA to get all the info. That's the best way.
You should have been definitely. And
unless someone registered late after you sent it, then they wouldn't have gotten it. Okay.
I'm sure that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. No worries. If anyone else needs it, let me know while Julia is talking. So.
Yes, you can make this for yourselves. Both of these snacks are really, 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 really tasty to have around. And next week we're going to be doing breakfast toast cups. So it's like this amazing dish that we make in a muffin pan with really tasty whole wheat toast, and we put in veggies and we put in cheese and we make the eggs right in the cup, and it turns into this sort of flower shaped breakfast all in one cup, and it is so much fun. I'm really excited to make that next week. And it's a great way to sneak in lots of veggies and really good protein. So we're going to make breakfast next week, which is my favorite because then I get to have breakfast for dinner, and breakfast for dinner is the most fun meal of the day.
I love it. I'm with you on that. I love breakfast for dinner.
All right, let's check our Cheez-It crackers here. Oh yeah, I want to show you guys. Okay, I need to put another thing down here. Little baking mat. I don't want to burn my cutting board. That would be tragic. Put your hot tray on something to protect your surfaces. I've got a little teeny tiny bit of caramelization happening around the edges of some of these crackers. Not much, but just a little bit. What's more important, listen. Can you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Nice, like crispy, dried out cracker hitting the thing, not breaking, not bouncing, not soft. You can see the bottoms have gotten nice and crisp and golden. Okay, so it's nice and toasty. That is very hot. Don't do that. Now, you guys have learned that I'm a pro and I can touch very hot things. Please don't try that. They just came out of the oven. If you want to let your parents help test and just make sure that they're nice and dried out and crispy, okay? That's a good way to test them. Just drop them, and if you get that sound, good solid, then they're done. So I've got nice Cheez-Its. These are gonna cool and dry out and get even more dry and firm and crispy as they rest. You don't have to rush about getting these off of the sheet pan, although if you did want to flip them over, you could use a little spatula and carefully flip them over so that the bottoms don't get over brown. We want to keep them that nice, perfect, beautiful, kind of cheesy golden brown. But since they're on a hot tray, they might keep cooking. So flipping them over is okay, but you don't have to. Because you pulled them out early enough, they're not going to burn. The pan will cool down. Eventually, what you want to do is get these off this tray and onto a little cooling rack or a plate where it can set up for, until it's completely cool. Totally 100% room temperature, and then you can store them in a bag or an airtight jar or something like that. Yeah, so Cheez-Its and Candied spicy nuts. We've got a couple of really fun treats and snacks to have around that I think are going to just be a lot better options than the versions you get at the store.
Exactly.
Yeah, oh, and we're just in time. Look at that. If there are any other last-minute questions, I would love to answer them. I'm sure Melody would too. We're going to definitely send out the information like we always do each week. It's so helpful, all of this information.
You send out sorry, am I hearing feedback or something? Sorry, okay. For those that are new, we do send a document at the end of every presentation that has all the nutrition information with the lovely ingredients that Julia uses. So if you're new, I think there's quite a few new people. We do that, so you have it all. And any other tips and tricks from Julia that are helpful as well.
Awesome. That's so appreciated. I learn something every week from these documents. So I didn't know that like 18 to 22 ingredients on a snack is scary when you can make it out of 5 ingredients. So just lesson learned.
Yeah. I mean, and not, the thing is, sometimes we do have products that have a lot of stuff in them, but we know what everything is. Like, you know, if you count all the spices, garlic, onion, you know, though that could add up to about 10 ingredients right there. So that's not horrible. But when you have about, you know, 18 ingredients and 10 you don't know, probably not great.
Yeah, when really it kind of should just be cheese, flour, water, and some spices. Yeah.
Oh, someone just asked, great question. How can they get the recipes for the sessions that they missed if they just added now? Is there a way?
I can email them to you. So put your email in the chat right here. Let me write it down or something. Or you can email me and reach out. But yeah, if there's any access to anything, I'll just email them to you. Someone signed up for our baking class late. I emailed him all of the recipes yesterday because they're still a really good resource. So if you put it in the chat box, I'll send it to you. Or if you privately send it to me or something, I can do that right now. Perfect.
I can send you her. Great question though. Okay, I just sent it privately to Julia, so you have it.
Thank you.
Any of the recipes as well, or any other documents? Great question.
Yeah, if anybody does want to look at any other of our older classes or resources, or even for some of the other classes like baking or breakfast, then just reach out. I'm happy to share the recipes, and you know, the recordings are being uploaded as quickly as they can be. So there are some, and there are still a backlog, but we're working away. So just keep checking back, and the videos will be there. And then the recipes are available. So reach out to me. You can either reach me at UCLA Teaching Kitchen on Instagram, or my email address, which is on our website, also Teaching Kitchen. So I think you put it in there, right? Yeah.
Put our programs, but if when I can put the.
Oh, no. The Instagram is fine, because if anybody messages me on there, or if you just find my email on our website, it's very, very simple. And I will email the backlog of our classes to this address today.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, I'm really excited. And I hope you guys make this. I hope you make all of the other recipes. I hope you had fun. We're a couple minutes late. Thank you for sticking around. I am going to stop the recording. And you guys, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Melody.
Oh, no problem. Bye.
Bye. Charlie, did you make anything? Do you want to show us?
Well, there's still about 9 minutes left.
Okay, I understand. We ran a little bit long, so maybe you could show us next time or send a picture, okay?
Should we show the inside of the oven?
Yeah,
Ooh.
I'm gonna turn around the camera.
Whoa, no magnets. Whoa. Sorry, guys.
Okay. As long as you're safe.
You okay?
Yeah, he's just playing with and trying to hold the iPad.
Oh, look at that.
Wow.
Very well done.
That's awesome.
I love all the different shapes.
Banana chips. Really does.
Yeah, it does, huh? But then when you bite it, it's going to taste like cheese. That'll be a surprise.
Yeah, that would be a surprise.
What has been your favorite thing you've made, Charlie?
The spring rolls, but they didn't taste the best. So I think they didn't taste the best, but I think they were the most fun to make.
Oh, okay.
Well, now that you like that technique of rolling spring rolls, you can experiment with other kinds of rolls and wraps, and maybe put other types of fillings into that spring roll paper and try it out.
Yeah, great idea.
I like it.
Cool, awesome job. I hope the crackers are delicious.
We made it into a salad with the peanut butter sauce and the filling.
Yeah, we were having a hard time getting them to stay in the wrappers.
Yeah, and the
That can
wrappers
happen.
were just so chewy that we turned it into a salad.
Oh,
That's a good idea.
that's a really great idea. It's
really good salad.
good for
Yeah.
both. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really good salad.
All right, we've seen the inside of our oven long enough.
Yeah.
You guys are funny.
Awesome.
Yeah, bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much. See you next time.